We begin in the Gemara on the bottom of Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara quotes what it said in the Mishnah, Ve'eim elabnin es hara'ofim. You can't whiten the tiles. That's when you heat up these tiles and then you can roast something on these tiles. You're not allowed to do that on Yontif. Fragt the Gemara, Mai ka'ovet. What is he doing that's an Isser to do this on Yontif? Amar Rabba Baba Chon Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hacha bera'ofim chadoshim askinan. These are brand new tiles that are used for this purpose of roasting something on it, and it was never used before. And the reason why you're not allowed to do it is in order to be able to heat it up to that extent and then to be able to cook on it, roast on it, you have to first test it. Sometimes these tiles can't handle the heat and it would burst apart and you can't use it. So what you have to do is you have to first heat it up and test it and see if it could handle the heat, and then you'll be able to cook with it. So therefore, if he's going to do this on Yontif with brand new tiles for the first time, it might end up bursting and he might not end up using it b'chlal. So he's being matriach on Yontif and heating something up. It's not going to end up being used for the cooking. Family law, others said it a little bit differently. What's the issue of heating up these tiles? If they're brand new, so it has to be hardened in order for it to be able to be used afterwards for cooking. So you're hardening it and preparing it in order to be able to use it. So even though it's for the purpose of Yontif, but nevertheless, you're making a keli. One of the things that's not allowed to be done on Yontif is you're not allowed to make a keli in the beginning. When it becomes a keli in this case, that's something that's forbidden. So that's the issue with these new tiles. Tanan Hassam. So the Gemara is going to bring a Mishnah in Chulin of a different subject, and it's going to try to come back to our Gemara here and see if it could prove a point regarding that Mishnah. So we learned the Mishnah in Chulin. Darsa, if a person is trampled on a chicken, on a bird, Aisha Tarfa bekaisel, or he threw it against the wall, Aisha Ritzatzta behema, or an animal crushed this bird, Umifarcheses, and this bird is like hardly alive. Bishasa meisleis, but it did survive, it continued living for another 24 hours. Rashi says Mifarcheses means it can't get up on its feet anymore. And so it's lying there. But for 24 hours it still lived. And Vishachta, and then he shechted it. Ksheira, so this bird is considered to be kosher. So Rashi says if it didn't survive for 24 hours, so then you know for sure that this animal is a treifa and you can't eat it. But if it did survive for 24 hours after you trampled on it or threw it against the wall and so on, so then it's going to be kosher if you shechted it. But on that, Omer Rabbi Elazar bar Yanai Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Antignis Tzricha bedika. The animal, or this bird that is, this bird is going to have to be checked to make sure that it's not treif. Usually when it comes to birds, we have a chazaka or a roiv that we can rely on, that most birds are kosher, and even if you're not baidik it, you can go ahead and eat it. But this bird, since it was trampled on or was thrown against the wall, so there's a big concern that it might be treif, so therefore it has to be inspected after you shecht it. That's the halacha regarding that case. Now on this, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question, so ma'ol l'shachta b'yomtiv. Such a bird, would you be allowed to shecht it on yomtiv? What's the issue? Do I assume and say that there's very big possibility that this bird is not even kosher? So why should you be allowed to shecht it on Yontif? You might end up shechting it and then discover that it's treif and you won't be able to eat it. I lie. Or I don't assume that. I can still shecht it and say that it might be kosher and therefore you can shecht it on Yontif. So obviously when it comes to any bird, we follow the roiv and say that even though it's always possible that a bird will be discovered to be treif, but you follow the roiv that most birds that you shecht are going to be kosher. So that's why you shecht everything on Yontif. But in this case, where we know that something happened to it, and therefore there's a halacha that you have to inspect it after you shecht it, that's the question of over here, would you be allowed to shecht it on Yontif? Amalei. So Rab Zera answered, Tanina. Can't we understand this? Can't we answer this question from what we learned here in this Mishnah? So the Mishnah said you can't whiten, you can't take these tiles and make them boiling, burning hot in order to roast on it. And the question was asked regarding this. My kavit, what is he doing that's not allowed on Yom Tov? The Mishnah is speaking about these tiles that are brand new. And the reason why you can't heat this up on Yontif is because then you're not sure if it could handle the heat. You have to inspect it, you have to test it to see if it could handle the heat, and therefore it might end up bursting. You might end up not being able to use it for cooking or roasting on it. So what do you see from here? That in a case where you're heating something up and you're not sure if it'll be useful for cooking, you're not allowed. So the same thing also regarding this bird, that you have to check it if it's a treifa or not after you shecht it. And there's a suffix, there's a very big suffix about this. Shouldn't we say the same thing, that you can't shecht it on Yontif? Amalei, so Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, there's not a raya from our Mishnah. Anan, I understood the Mishnah like the second version we brought before, that the issue of heating up these tiles, these brand new tiles on Yontif, is not because of a suffix, that maybe it's going to burst. But the issue is that it's brand new, and therefore in order to use them, it has to be heated up to harden it, to strengthen it. And therefore it's not because of a suffix. It's a vadai. Over here the person is making a keli on Yontif. That's the issue of heating up these brand new tiles. But over here regarding these birds that might be a treifa, it's very, very possible that it's a treifa, maybe you could still shecht it on Yontif, and we're not concerned about that. So therefore there's no raya from our Mishnah to that question. The Gemara doesn't resolve that question. Tanya, we learned in the Beitza. And here's again another Gemara brings up another Beitza regarding a different subject, and then it's going to come back to the case that we're speaking about here. What happens in a case where you have one person that brought fire, and another person brought the wood, and the other person positioned the pot on this fire. And he's done one. The person that put the pot there put an empty pot, and the other person put in the water in the pot. And another person added spices. And another person came along and stirred the pot. Kulan chayavin. They're all being over on an isser. They're all doing an isser. So most of them are very obvious what they're doing wrong. If one that brings the fire, so Rashi says when you transport the fire, the wind that blows in the fire makes the fire larger, so you're being over on the lava of avara, on the malach of avara. The one that brings the wood, he puts the wood into the fire, he's also being over on avara. The one that places the pot, the empty pot in the fire, so that the Gemara will discuss here. Which malacha? What are you doing wrong when you place an empty pot in the fire? You're not cooking anything. There's nothing in the pot. And then the one that brings the water, he's being over on the Isra, on the malacha of bishul. And the one that adds the tavlin, the spices, and the one that stirs it is also contributing to bishul, to cooking on Shabbos. So they're all going to be chayiv for contributing to the malacha that was done here. Frag the Gemara, but Vatanya, in another Beitza we learned, Achrein chayiv, that only the last one, he's the one that's chayiv. And v'kulam peturim, the rest of them are all pater. And the answer to that is, Loi kashe, there's no contradiction between these two Breises. Ha the aisi or meikara, if the fire was brought from the beginning, so then everyone else that follows is already doing a malacha. When you're putting the water, when you're putting the fire, the wood, and so on. So because the fire is already there, so you're cooking and you're doing a malacha. So all of them are going to be chayiv. And ha the aisi or b'saif, if the fire was brought last, so everyone else that put the pot there, and put the water there, put the spices and stirred the pot, you've done nothing if there's no fire there yet. So therefore only the one that put the fire there at the end is going to be over the Aveda. So that's the pshat in these two Breises. But now the Gemara focuses on one detail where the Breisa said that the one that placed the pot there is also doing a malacha. Frek the Gemara bishloi mekulu. So all the others we understand kavdi ma'isa, they're doing an action which is a malacha, whether havara or bishul. Elishayfis is sakdeira, the one that positions the pot on top of the fire, an empty pot that is, my kav, which malacha is he doing? What is he doing wrong? Rab Shimon ben Lakish, hacha b'kedeira chadasha askinon. The Breises are speaking about a brand new pot. Umishom libun ra'afim naguba. Similar to what we said before in our Mishnah, when you use these tiles to cook on them, and you have to first heat up these tiles to harden it, and that's making a keli. It's the malacha of makeh b'patish, that final blow that makes a keli. Over here we're talking about this new pot, and you're hardening it when you place it on the fire, so that's also malacha of makeh b'patish. Tana Rabbanon, we learned in the Beitza. Tana v'kirayim chadoshim. If you have a brand new oven, harei ein kechol ha'kelim anitolim b'chotzer, they're like any other kelim that are allowed to be moved in the chotzer on Yontif, because this is something that can be used on Yontif to cook in it. Aval ein sachen noisam shemen. You're not allowed to apply oil to it to shine it or to smooth it out. Ve'ein toshen noisam b'matlis. You're not allowed to rub it or clean it off with a shmata. Ve'ein mafigen noisam b'tzeinon. And you're not allowed to cool it off with something cold, kidei l'chasman, which is done for the purpose to strengthen the oven. After it's heated up, you cool it off, and the cooling it off is what strengthens and hardens the oven. Ve'im b'shvil lefais, if you're cooling it off, not because you want to harden the oven, but because you want to be able to bake in it. You heated up your oven before Yom Tiv, and it became too hot, and if you're going to try to bake in it, it's going to burn everything inside the oven, and you want to cool down the temperature a little bit. Then it's allowed because you're only cooling it off for the purpose of baking. It's the same thing also when it comes to a fire on Yom Tiv, that if it's necessary to lower a flame, and if you're not going to lower the flame, you're going to burn your food, you're allowed to lower the flame. If you have another flame, or if you can put your food on the fire, maybe with a separation or partially, or in a way that it won't burn your food, so then you're not allowed to lower the flame on Yom Tiv. It's mechabe. But if you have no other way to cook other than this very flame, and if you're not going to lower it, it's going to burn your food, you're allowed to lower the flame, like it says right over here in this Beitza. Tana Rabbana, we learned in another Beitza. After you shech the animals, and then you have the head or the feet that have hairs in it, and you want to get off the hairs, so you put it into boiling hot water, and it takes off the hairs. Or another way to do this is to singe it in fire. Also, you're allowed to do this for the purpose to be able to eat. But there's another way how this is done, when they paste on it charsis, which is some kind of a lime. Charsis and adome is either what's the exact translation that you have it? Charsis and adome is
lime, on the top of lime.
Yeah, some kind of a lime that they would paste on the head or the different parts of the body of the animal. V'loy besid, or you're not allowed to put sid on the animal. Also, yeah, some kind of earth, some kind of lime, plaster. Okay, they paste it onto the animal, and then they peel it off, and it takes off the hair. Ve'en geizes in oisan b'misperayim, and you're also not allowed to take off the hairs with the scissors that's usually used to shear the wool of animals, or to take off the hairs of the animals, because it looks like that you're doing the malacha of just taking off the hairs, and you want to use the hairs. This is the scissor that's usually used to cut the hairs when you need the hairs, even though you're only doing it for the purpose to be able to eat the meat. But this is the normal way how it's done when you want to use the hair, so that's not allowed. Similar halacha, vein geizes in a sayerek b'tispeiris shaloi. You're not allowed to cut when you have vegetables, and the vegetables have some leaves that are on top of it that you want to get rid of to be able to eat the vegetables. You're not allowed to cut those leaves off with the regular scissor that's used to cut them from the ground, because then it looks like you just freshly cut it today. But you're not allowed to cut it on Shabbos from the ground. Aval misaknin es kundis v'sachboyis. You're allowed to prepare the food which is called kundis or achboyis. These are kinds of food that you have to cook it a lot, and it's a very big tircha to prepare them. But you're allowed to prepare them on Yom Tov. Umasikin v'oifin b'porni. You're allowed to heat up and cook in a porni, which is a larger oven. It's more similar to the ovens that we had today. The ovens in the time of the Gemara were ovens that were small, and their opening was from the top. And these are ovens that the Rashi says similar to the ovens that we have today. They're larger, or it's called a furnace. Okay, it's an oven that has an opening from the side. So you're allowed to cook in them on the Yom Tov. Umechamin chamin, and you can heat up hot water ba'antichi in a large urn. Ve'ein oifin b'porni chadasha, but you can't cook in a brand new porni, in this large oven, in this furnace. Shema tifchas, because it might break apart. If it's the first time that you're using it, it might not. It might not work, it might break, and therefore it comes out that you heated up this oven for no reason. You end up not using it for the purpose of heating up your food. Tana Rabbanan and a Beitza we learned. Ein noivchin b'mapuach. When you want to blow the fire, to fan the flames of the fire, you're not allowed to use a mapuach, this a bellow that's usually used for this purpose. Avol noivchin b'shfeiferes, but you can use a tube that's smaller, and then blow it with a tube. That's allowed. The aim is saknin es hashpud. You can't prepare and repair a skewer to be able to use it to cook with it. The aim mechaded in oisai, and you can't sharpen the skewer for this purpose. So Rashi says that this last point of not preparing the skewer, this goes into the concept of machshirei oichel nefesh, when you're preparing and doing a malacha, not in the actual food itself, but you're preparing the utensil that's then going to be used for the food. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this is allowed actually. So therefore this Beitza is not like Rabbi Yehuda, Rashi says. Or Rashi says this is something that could have been prepared from before Yom Tov. Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees, if it's something that could be prepared before Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov itself. Tana Rabbanan, and another Beitza we learned, Ein mefatzen es hakone litzlis boy. You're not allowed to break a reed in order to use it to roast with it. Maliach, it's used to roast a fish. We had this before. The Mishnah said that they didn't place the fish directly on the coals, it would get burnt, but they put the fish on these reeds and then on top of the coals. So you're not allowed to break these reeds to prepare them to be able to roast the fish on it. Aval mefatzen es ha'ega is b'matlis. You're allowed to break open nuts that are wrapped in a cloth. And we're not concerned if by doing this, if by trying to crack the nuts inside a cloth, you're going to tear the cloth itself, because Rashi says this is not the malacha of kaireya, because kaireya is only a malacha if you tear something with the intention to resew it. But over here, you're just putting it inside of a cloth because it makes it easier for you to be able to crack it open. So therefore, even if the cloth tears, it is no malacha d'oraisa, and you're doing this for the purpose of eating, it's allowed. Zok Teilige Mishneh, V'oid Omar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said another halacha, and the V'oid is a continuation from the previous Mishnah, where Rabbi Eliezer said the halacha where he was lenient. So over here as well, Rabbi Eliezer says another halacha that he was lenient. So another thing Rabbi Eliezer said, Oimid Adam ala muktzeh. A person could stand in his field on a muktzeh. Muktzeh refers to an area that you set apart. You set it apart for drying figs or drying any kinds of fruits that you're not going to eat them until it's fully dried. So it's out in the field and it's not yet a finished product. It's still drying up. So if a person goes out in the field before Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, the Mishnah says, and he stands over there, and the Mishnah adds, B'Shvius, this is in Shemitah. I'll explain in a moment what the significance of Shemitah is, but first let's see what he's saying over here. V'oimer, and the person stands and says, Mikan ani oichel lemachar. From here, from this area, I will eat tomorrow. So the point is, if it's muktzeh, if it's this area where you have these figs that you're drying, so because it's not yet designated to eat, because it's not fully dried yet, this is going to be muktzeh. It's not something that people usually eat. But if you're going to come there and specifically say before Shabbos that I am going to be eating from here, so then it's not muktzeh. You prepared it for yourself and designated it to be eaten on Shabbos. Now what's the significance of Shemitah? So Rashi explains there's another issue here. You didn't take any maasros yet. In order to be able to eat from it, you have to take maaser, and you can't take maaser on Shabbos. So therefore the Mishnah says this is speaking about Shemitah. On Shemitah, there's no chiyuv of maasros. Okay, so therefore, if it's on Shemitah, again?
No?
Yeah, exactly. There's a limit from a pasuk actually. Does Rashi bring it later? I'm not sure. But we learn from a pasuk that there's no chiyuv of maasros in Shemitah. And therefore, when Rashi says, when the Mishnah says Shemitah, it means either Shemitah or in another situation where you already took the maaser. And therefore, there's no issue of maasros and you can eat it on Shabbos. But if it would be obligated in maaser and you didn't take the maaser yet, you can't eat from it. It's tevel. Tevel is when something is obligated in maaser and you didn't take the maaser yet. So therefore, if it's Shemitah and he designated it to eat, then you're allowed to eat from it. Okay. So in other words, we have over here two things that the Mishnah is addressing. The fact that it should not be muktzeh, because you designated it to eat. And the other point is that the maasros is not an issue because it's Shemitah. The Gemara is going to focus on this point of maasros, as we'll see. The Chachamim say, if you want to designate this to eat, so you have to say even more. That's not enough. The person has to specifically make a siman. He has to show and make a siman in the ground, in the place where he has these things that are drying in the field. From this spot until this spot, this is specifically from where I'm going to eat. The person can't come stand in his field and say in general, from this area I'm going to be eating. Rashi explains, the basis of the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is the concept that we had many times, whether ein breira or yesh breira, which means if you don't specifically designate what you're going to eat from, so the Chachamim hold ein breira. Later, when you take from one specific area, I can't say that this retroactively clarifies, this is what you want to eat. No, beforehand, you didn't specifically designate. So therefore it's not enough. You have to, in advance, specifically designate what it is you're going to eat. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer holds, yesh pereira. If I come and say in this general area that I'm going to eat from here, and then later you take from one specific spot, so now that you took from that specific spot, retroactively, that clarifies to us that when you were designating to eat, it was this spot that you meant to take it from. That's the hezbollah of the machlekes according to Rashi. Zok the Gemara Tanan Hasam, we learned a Mishnah in Masechta Maisris. So as I mentioned, the Gemara is going to focus on this aspect of Maisris regarding eating from this dried figs in the field that are not yet fully dried, they're not yet really fully prepared. It's an unfinished product, and you want to use it to eat on Shabbos. So, the Gemara is going to bring a Mishnah in Maisris, but before we see the Mishnah of Maisris, just two very simple points regarding the halacha of Maisris. When are you obligated to give Maiser? So there's two basic requirements in order for your produce to be chayiv in Maisris. One is, it has to be a finished product, a gemar malacha. And usually, for example, if you're going to be eating figs, fresh figs, so after you pick the figs from the tree and you have them together, that's a finished product. That's one condition. But let's say if you're going to be drying your figs, so you're not eating it fresh, so then it's not considered to be a finished product until the figs are fully dried and it's fit for eating. Then there's another condition for being chayiv and maisris. Only if you bring it into your house. When it's brought indoors into your house, then you're chayiv and maisris. If it's outdoors, you're not going to be chayiv and maisris. You're not going to be chayiv and maisris, and you can eat from the produce outdoors temporarily. You can't eat midrabanon. You can't eat permanently from it. You can only eat b'derech arei from it. Those are the two conditions to be chayiv and maisris. Now let's see what it says in the Mishnah. Tanan asam, so we learned in the Mishnah and maisris. Tinaikis shetamnu te'enim me'erev Shabbos. Children went and took figs, fresh figs that they want to eat for Shabbos, and they concealed it. They hid it inside the ground before Shabbos for the purpose for eating it on Shabbos. I mean, back then they didn't have refrigeration, so how would they keep something fresh? They would put it in the ground, and they left it there from before Shabbos. V'shakchu v'lo yisru, but they forgot. They did not take the maestris of this before they put it away. L'matzah Shabbos. So then, even after Shabbos, lo yoichlu. They're not allowed to eat of it yet. Ella came isru, unless they took the maestris of this. So what's the chiddush of that Mishnah? There's a few chiddushim here. The first chiddush of that Mishnah is, even though it wasn't brought into the house, usually you're not chayiv to give maestris unless the produce is brought inside the house. Over here, you're going to be chayiv. And the reason is, so Rashi explains, because food that's designated to eat for Shabbos, because the food that you eat on Shabbos is significant as chshivus, it's for the Suda of Shabbos, and we'll see soon the Gemara brings the pasuk, when you eat food on Shabbos, it's the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Oynik Shabbos, the pleasure of Shabbos. So therefore, that itself establishes it for that it's going to be chayiv and maisris, because it has a certain chshivus. So therefore, you can't eat from it. Once it was designated to eat for Shabbos, you can't eat from it without taking maisris. That's the main chiddush of that Mishnah. Rashi says there's also another chiddush over here, because the Mishnah mentions that it's speaking about children that put it away. Why does it mention dafka children? Because it's telling you that even the action of children in this sense is significant. Usually a child that has a machshava about something, the opinion of what the child thinks about something doesn't matter. But over here, because the child didn't only think about this, that he wants to eat it for Shabbos, but he also went and he put it away, did an action. He put it away and is under the ground in order to save it for Shabbos. So therefore, it's designated to eat for Shabbos, and therefore, even if it was not brought into the house, it's already going to be chayiv and maisris, and you can't eat from it until you take the maiser. Okay, that's this Mishnah. But the point is, in this Mishnah, it's speaking about fresh figs that he's going to eat. So the condition of gemar malacha, that it's produce that is a fine, it's a finished product, it's ready to eat. It's a finished product, but it wasn't brought into the house. And even though it wasn't brought into the house, but because it was designated to eat for Shabbos, you chayiv for maiser. Tananami, there's another Mishnah that says, if a person takes the figs and he spreads them out in his courtyard in order to dry them. So now we see that he's not intending to eat these figs fresh, he wants to dry them. So it's not yet a finished product before it's fully dried. So his children, the people of his household, they can all eat from it temporarily, upturim, and it's pater from meiser. And the reason is because it's not yet a finished product. Okay, so now the question is, Boy, mine Rav Rav Nachman. Rav asked the question from Rav Nachman, Shabbos. If you designate something to eat for Shabbos, Mahu shetikva muktzeh l'maiser. Could the fact that you designated it for Shabbos establish it that even muktzeh, even something which is not a finished product yet, could it designate it that it should be obligated in taking maisres? And this is bedavar shalei nigmara malachtai. Because it's only muktzah, which means it's something that you want to dry these figs, and it's not yet a finished product, so it's not a finished product. Usually if it's something that's not a finished product, it's not chayiv and maisres. But if I establish it that I want to eat it for Shabbos, will it become chayiv and maisres or not? The point of the Gemara's question is, the Mishnah that we brought before, that when you decide that you want to eat these figs for Shabbos, so that itself has a chshivus and it's obligated in Meiser, that Mishnah was talking about the figs that he wants to eat fresh figs. So therefore it was already a finished product. Elamai, he didn't bring it into his house.
But the courtyard is not his house?
No, courtyard does not have the same halach as the house, exactly. So therefore, before when we're talking about a finished product, and he designated it to eat for Shabbos, there we say, the Mishnah clearly said, that the fact that he wants to use it for Shabbos takes the place of bringing it into the house, even though he didn't bring it into the house, but because he wants to use it for Shabbos, it's going to be chayiv and maisres. But now the Gemara is asking, this chshivus that Shabbos has, when you designate something for Shabbos, does that go so far to say that even when you have dried figs that are not finished to be dried yet, and it's not a finished product, will the fact that you want to eat it for Shabbos be significant enough that it gives it its chshivus, that it's going to be chayiv and maisres, even before it's a finished product? Mi amrinan, do I say, even the pasuk says v'karasa Shabbos einik, that when you eat the food for Shabbos, it's a pleasure. You're fulfilling the einik of Shabbos. Kava. So therefore it establishes it that you're eating it for this purpose and it's chayiv and meiser. And therefore not only if it's not brought into your house are you chayiv and meiser, but even if it's missing the other condition, that the malacha wasn't completed, this is an unfinished product, it's still chayiv and meiser because you're using it for Shabbos. Or perhaps the Mishnah before said, if it's a fresh fig that you want to eat and it's a finished product, then the fact that you designated it for Shabbos, it establishes it that it's achayv and meiser. But if it's the figs that you spread out in the field to dry it, then it's not a finished product yet. The fact that you want to eat it for Shabbos will not obligate it in meiser. So he answered him, Rav Nachman answered and said, Shabbos koivas, once you designate the food to be eaten for Shabbos, it establishes it to be chayiv and meiser. Whether it's something that's a finished product, and even something that's not a finished product, once you designate it to eat for Shabbos, you're chayiv and meiser. So Rav asked Rav Nachman, how do you know this? Shabbos dumye de. Why shouldn't I say that when you establish something to eat for Shabbos, it should be similar to something that's left outside in the courtyard? Just like regarding a chotzer. So we have the condition that you're not chayiv and meiser unless it's a finished product. Why don't I say the same regarding Shabbos, that the power of Shabbos to establish something that it should be chayiv and meiser should only be when it's a finished product, but not if it's not a finished product? Why are we saying that the fact that he wants to use it for Shabbos is so powerful that even if it's not in the house, and even if it's not a finished product, nevertheless it's going to be chayiv and meiser? So he answered him, Omalei, limud arachu b'yadenu, or another gear says, Talmud arachu b'yadenu. I have this as a tradition, as it was taught. Was taught to me clearly this way. Shabbos koivas. Once you designate this product, this produce to eat for Shabbos, so it establishes it to be chayiv and meiser. Bein b'dava shenigmara malachtai, bein b'dava shalei nigmara malachtai. Regardless of whether it's something that's a finished product, whether it's not a finished product, it makes no difference. He told him, this is the Messiah that I had. He didn't bring him any proof for this, but he said, this is what I was taught. This is the halacha. So now we come back to our Mishnah. So Mazutre, the son of Rav Nachman, said, to support what his father said, Afanan namitanina. We can prove this from what we learned in our Mishnah. What did it say in our Mishnah? Rabbi Eliezer says, a person comes before Shabbos out into his field, and he has muktzah there. What is muktzah referring to? To this figs that you spread out to dry in the field, and it's not a finished product yet. It's not fully dried yet. So you're standing out in the field on Erev Shabbos. What did the Mishnah say? The Shvius. It's Shemitah, and because it's Shemitah, you're not chayiv and meiser, and therefore, once you designate it to eat for Shabbos, it's not muktzah anymore, and you could eat it on Shabbos. But the Mishnah said specifically because it's Shemitah, and therefore there's no obligation of Maisris. Taime the Shvius. The only reason the Maisris is not an issue is because it's Shemitah, and the law of Bar Yisuriyu, so there's no Maiser in Shemitah. Oh, b'shar shnei shavua. Any other year, not Shemitah, hochanami the Aser. There would be an issue of Maisris here. You wouldn't be able to eat it. The fact that you designated it to eat for Shabbos would not work because now you're going to be chayiv to give Maisris from it. My time, what's the reason you're chayiv to give Maisris for it? Lav, don't you think the reason is Mishum the Shabbos kava? Even though this is a product that's unfinished, it's still in the middle of drying in the field. That's what muktzah means, it's in the field drying. But nevertheless, because you came and said that you want to use it for Shabbos, so that establishes it to be chayiv and ma'aseh, even if it's an unfinished product. So the Mishnah is a clear raya to what Rav Nachman said. So the Gemara answers, no, there's no raya from our Mishnah. Loi. Shani Hasam, the Mishnah is different. Kivin the Omar. If a person verbally clearly says this, that Mikan ani yoichel lemachar, from here I am going to eat tomorrow, kavale ilave. So the very fact that he comes and says that for me this is done, this is finished, I want to eat from here, so that establishes it for him that he wants to eat from this, and therefore he's going to be chayiv in maisris. So in other words, it has nothing to do with Shabbos. It's not because of the chshivas, of the suda of Shabbos, of the einig of Shabbos. Over here the reason is because the person verbally said, I want to eat from here. If you say so clearly, so then it establishes it that it becomes chayiv and meiser. If that's the reason why over here it's chayiv and meiser, because you clearly said so, my area Shabbos. So why is the Mishnah that is bringing up this kind of a case and teaching me this halacha regarding Shabbos? So then this has nothing to do with Shabbos. On any weekday, if you have an unfinished product in your field, but you come along and clearly say, I am planning on eating from this tomorrow, the very fact that you verbally said so establishes it to eat from it, and therefore you're chayiv ma'aseh. This has nothing to do with Shabbos. This could be any day of the week as well. So this detail should be taught somewhere else. It's not a chiddush over here regarding Shabbos. So the Gemara answers, there is another chiddush over here regarding Shabbos. Kamash Malam. The chiddush over here in this Mishnah regarding Shabbos is the tevel muchanu eitzel Shabbos. That this tevel, which the maisris were not taken from it yet, is considered to be prepared for Shabbos. Shem avar v'tiknan misukan. That if a person b'diavad went and took the maisris of this on Shabbos, then he's going to be allowed to eat from it in Shabbos. In other words, Rashi says that the Mishnah over here is saying that there's going to be an issue with the maisris. If you don't take the maisris, so then it's tevel. You're not allowed to eat it. Okay, but that's all if you did not take the maisris. What happens if b'diavad someone went ahead and took the maisris on Shabbos? Minat Torah, you're allowed to separate maisris on Shabbos. The whole issue of taking maisris on Shabbos is only midrabanan. Minat Torah, there's no isser. So b'diavad, if someone went ahead and took the maisris on Shabbos, you're going to be allowed to eat it. Even though when Shabbos came in, it was tevel and it was unfit for eating, but nevertheless, b'diavad, if it was taken on Shabbos, you're going to be allowed to eat it. Why? Even though when Shabbos came in, it was muktzah, it was tevel, it was not fit for eating. So Rashi says, because what this Mishnah is saying is, if when Shabbos came in, something was unfit to eat, only midrabanan, but minat Torah, it was fit for eating, there's no issue of muktzah if later on Shabbos itself you went ahead and took the meiser, even though you weren't allowed to. But if you took the meiser on Shabbos, since the whole issa was only issa midrabanan, you're allowed to eat it on Shabbos. Now, where do you see this from the Mishnah? So Rashi says, if you look into the words of the Mishnah said, Oymid Adam ala muktzah. Oymid Adam ala muktzah is saying that Yulchatchila could stand there and say and designate this for Shabbos. The fact that the Mishnah uses the lashon of lechatchila is mashma, that it's coming to say that this is the way it can be done lechatchila, if it's shmita and there's no issue of maisris. If it was not shmita, then b'diavad, if you did take the maisris on Shabbos, then it's going to be allowed to eat. because the Mishnah is using a lashon of l'chatchila, I can be medayik from this that on any other year, which is not Shemitah, and you are obligated in Maasros, if you took the Maasros in the middle of Shabbos, it is b'diavad going to be allowed to eat, and there won't be any issue of muktzeh. That's the specific chiddush that this Mishnah is saying.